Good morning, good people. I've got a brief message for the church as I arrive to the office for a few hours this morning. So we've, as a country now, completed both political party conventions, the Democratic convention and the Republican convention. And everybody is given their vision and, rallied their, quote unquote troops to wage war in this battle for the future of America. But once again, I'm talking to the church, and I just want to challenge us to remember whose side we're on. In this season, gosh, not even this season, man, like past handful of years, there's been so much divisiveness, and it's conservatism versus liberalism, and Democratic versus Republican, and black versus white, and so many different things. We're just choosing sides all the time. And I couldn't help but think about in Joshua 5, like that scenario there. You've got the changing of the guard, really, in the generations. Joshua is now the leader of the people of Israel, and he's preparing to take them into battle. And even prior to this battle of Jericho, one thing that's interesting, and I think it's a good note for all of us, God actually, before having them go off to war, God consecrates all of the young generation. So the older guys, the men of the generation that came out of Egypt had all been circumcised, which was a physical demonstration of their sold outness for the God of Israel. But in their travels in in the wilderness for so many years, those guys had kind of died off, and now you've got this new generation who were children along the way who'd not been circumcised, they'd not been consecrated, and before they began this battle, God had them all be circumcised. And I think we would be wise as we're going into these conflicts between these sides, that we would look at the generation that's been coming up, the generation that is seeing the battle, but they don't have the same consecration, the same circumcision of the generation before. And if we're not careful, we will actually, in our battles, we will lose the ultimate war. And the next generation, talk about the future of America, the next generation will not have the consecration of the generation before. So we need to be sure that we are stewarding the future generations in the Lord and discipling them as we go into these battles. So let's talk about the battle. In Joshua 5, as we continue on there, we see one of the most significant passages. I want to say it's in verse 13, where you've got you've got Joshua, who's like near, Jericho, and you suddenly have a man with a sword who, like, he's glowing, and Joshua's not even sure who this is, and then he gets the revelation, this is God incarnate, So this is the man physically that's representing God. And he introduced himself as the commander of the Lord's armies. But Joshua asks him, when he sees this man with the sword, before he even knows really for sure who he is, he knows, man, this guy looks formidable. This guy looks like one that I'd want to be aligned with. And he asks him, are you for me, or are you for my enemies? Are you a friend, or are you a foe? Are you with me, or are you with the adversaries? And I love this response. The representative of God, the physical representation of God, the commander of the Lord's army, says just that. I'm the commander of the Lord's army. Like, he asked him an either or question. Are you friend or are you foe? And he actually says, no. Like, don't you hate it when you ask somebody that, hey, do you want to go to, McDonald's, or do you want to go to Burger King? And, like, they don't give you a yes or no answer, or they don't give you a either or answer. They'll say, no, or sure, I don't care, or whichever. Like, God is saying here, I don't pick sides. Like, are you with them or are you with me? No. And he says, I am the commander of the Lord's army. And then Joshua, immediately recognizing this is God, he bows down to worship him. And he says, he submits. He says, okay, I'm your servant. What would you have me to do? And he says, take off your sandals because you're on holy ground. So you guys, as we go into November, as we continue to walk through these days that are really a battle, there's a war, you got to remember, like, what side you're on. Now, I'm not talking to Republicans. I'm not talking to Democrats. I'm not talking to conservatives. I'm not talking to liberals. I'm not talking to black people, white people, Hispanics, Asians, Native Americans. I'm not talking to anyone but the church. And so what God would say to the church is, no, I'm not conservative. No, I'm not with the liberals. No, I'm not with the Democrats. No, I'm not with the Republicans. No. You worship me. He's like, you don't go about your earthly business and call me down to be on your side. Cancel that. You want to talk about cancel culture? Cancel your side. You're with me. Are you with me? Worship me. And you're on holy ground right now. You guys, we are in a holy moment. As we step forward into this just yucky, miry, just messed up world, there's a generation that is lacking the consecration that we've had. And we're stepping into a battle, choosing sides when the Lord says, are you with me? And then worship me. Take off your sandals. You're on holy ground. We're in a holy, holy moment. Treat it as such. Wherever you're at, whichever side you've chosen, check your heart and understand there's only one righteous one, and it ain't you. And he says, I hold righteousness. I hold justice. Will you submit to me? That comes before anything else. And if you don't know, Joshua continued to go on and fight the battle. But it was the Lord that he was submitted to. And so I'm not saying don't vote. I'm not saying don't, have different ideologies that are part of the way that you do life. But they better be submitted to God. And when they do not align with him in his righteousness, that's a holy thing. Then you better be able to call that out. You better be able to reject that. You better be able to see through the games that the world tries to make you play. And if we're not careful, we just pick a side and we're no longer looking like the church. We're just looking like our side. And if you don't know this, there's so much ungodliness on all of these sides. So we better pick God and his army and get his power and get his spirit to be driving us. And you can't decide that you're going to choose righteousness and then go about it in unrighteous ways. You can't get God's will your way. His will is his way. So that's all I'm going to say. I've arrived at my destination. My rant for today is done. Yeah. Please do not turn this into but my side is more righteous than the other side. Like, if that's really how you're hearing this, then guess what? You just rose your hand and said, I picked a side. And trust me, there is sin in your side. And if you're not calling it out, if you're not recognizing that as you're working, as you're moving, then you've chosen your side. And I think the Lord, the commander of the Lord's army, would look at you and say, no. Take off your sandals. You're in holy ground, and worship him. Anyways, I'm going to preach it again. All right, love y'all. Be blessed and be a blessing.